Hello, today I'll be interviewing my dad, Major Michael Ramsay of the Salvation Army. So you are a Salvation Army officer. What exactly is that?
Well, that's a question that could take up the whole time. Salvation Army officer, we do so much, right? So, of course, most people I think would know that the Salvation Army officers were pastors, so then we have to do many different church things. Like, for instance, this weekend I have a wedding to perform, and I often will perform different funerals and ceremonies as well as most church-related activities, right? You know, preaching and teaching and running kids programs and all of that sort of thing. Now, Salvation Army, of course, we do so much more than that. Most Salvation Army officers are also responsible for food banks. And so here we run the food bank in the Alberni Valley. We run, of course, social services outreach here in the Alberni Valley as part of the Salvation Army. And of course, we have the thrift store, which I understand provided some of your attire even for today's production, right? Salvation Army officers often run soup kitchens. And I certainly do partner with the Bread of Life, and as a Salvation Army officer, I am responsible for the operations of the Bread of Life soup kitchen here. Salvation Army officers often run shelters, and of course the Salvation Army is in the process of getting a shelter here in our community. Salvation Army officers really work to try and help out with those who are in the most vulnerable of situations, and here in our community we've got our food truck that we can take food around to people wherever they happen to be, to feed them and to check on them and make sure that they're okay. We've also got that big refrigerator truck so we can go get stuff from away to bring it and try and help people out. I could go on for 80 million years, I think, about what we do. I mean, so many other responsibilities as well. Of course, I'm a chaplain for the Legion as part of being a Salvation Army officer, so help out with many different Legion activities, and really always happy to help out with Remembrance Day ceremonies and all those sorts of things.
So why are you called a major?
Why am I called a major? Well, that's a good question. I mean, a lot of people will put all kinds of different things after the word major, but I think it's mostly Salvation Army uses a ranking system, right? So we have one general in the Salvation Army, and that's the person who's in charge of the whole thing. And so everything in the Salvation Army, from the general who runs the whole thing to the name, Salvation Army, uses different military terminology. So our different units, our different Salvation Armies in different parts of the cities and countries are called corps, as in Army Corps. And so then officers is part of that same language. So a person, when they first become a member of the Salvation Army, they can go through classes and they can become a soldier, in which case they get to wear some nice blue epaulets. And then they can, as they do their different work, they can have different ranks. They can be a Sunday school sergeant or a corps sergeant major. And then they can head off to training college, where you learn how to be an officer and do all of those things that I mentioned and more. And then you can be commissioned as a lieutenant, and then once you pass your lieutenancy after a couple of years, you can become a captain, and then after you've been a captain for quite a few years, then you achieve the rank of major. And so that's a long answer to say that I've been 15 years since I have been commissioned as an officer.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the Salvation Army? How did it get started?
How did it get started? Well, I mean, you should know some of this yourself as a junior soldier in the Salvation Army. But Salvation Army was started in London's East End in the 1860s. It was started out as the Christian Mission in 1865. And William and Catherine Booth, a husband and wife team of Methodist preachers, really said, you know, what's the point of just preaching people the gospel, telling them about God without taking care of their basic needs? So they really focused on feeding people, soup, soap, and salvation, they would say, to try and provide people with the basic necessities. And in the early days, they did a lot to really help out. For instance, if anybody's ever, those matches we use when we're camping, those wooden matches that strike anywhere. The Salvation Army actually invented those kind of strike anywhere matches because in London in the 1860s, people were working in the match factories, and they would get something called flossy jaw, which the phosphorus would actually make their jaws decay. And so they would glow in the dark, and then they would actually die from it. So the Salvation Army said, this isn't right. So the Salvation Army took over a match factory, and they invented the safety matches we've got today. And they introduced living wages for their people. They got it all set up, and then gave it back, and they went from there. Salvation Army in the early days as well. There was a lot of trafficking in London's East End. They actually set up one of the first sting operations to break up a human trafficking chain. And Salvation Army has always been involved in the very basics for helping out people where they were needed right from the beginning, and that continues on to today, and all that we're doing to help out those who are on the margins of society in everything that we do.
What did you do before you became a Salvation Army officer?
Before I became a Salvation Army officer, I was a business person, and I was mostly involved in the business of education. So I ran a company by the name of Havelock Education, and through that company we did a number of different things. We published the Journal of International Education. We ran the Vancouver and Island Homestay Association that worked with all the different schools that brought students over from overseas and getting all of that arranged. And then I had different contracts at the Ministry of Education, the Learning Resources branch, and defense research, and wrote some curriculum for private schools, ran a tutoring company, so a lot of different things in the business of education.
The Salvation Army is a church. How do you come up with sermons?
How do you come up with sermons? Well, usually from my kids, right? Yeah. How do you come up? Well, you come up with sermons because in your daily life, when you're reading through your Bible, and you read through the different passages in your Bible, and you see what's going on in the world, and you see what's going on in your life, and you see the way God is working through so many different people. And every once in a while, I'll have a conversation with a good friend who will give me an idea, like say maybe the apocalypse is nuanced, and then I'll develop the whole thing into a sermon from there based upon a conversation.
What work do you do before church on Sundays?
What work do I do before church on Sundays? Well, I come here as soon as I possibly can, and I help make sure that everything is set up in the space for church, because as you know, the Salvation Army space is used for so much during the week, so we have to get here early enough and get it all set up for church. Then we have to review everything that everybody's got together, have to review the order of service, have to confirm that the musicians have got their music, have to confirm that the people who are doing all the audiovisual work have got all the links to everything that is needed, have to make sure that doors are unlocked so that people can actually get to all the things they need, and really have to work with and supervise the great team that goes together to put together a really good Sunday service.
You won Citizen of the Year 2020. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
What are some of the great things you and your team have done in 2020?
Wow. I tell you, 2020, this team here, the people who are working with the Salvation Army and the partner agencies, I can't even express my thanks to the amazing amount of work that people are doing. In 2020, when the pandemic hit, at one point in its greatest need, the Salvation Army, its volunteers, its community partners were feeding over 750 people a day with delivering meals straight to their homes, because in those early days, if we remember that, we weren't supposed to get out anywhere. And so we were delivering things straight to people's homes. And in that first year of the pandemic in 2020, the Salvation Army, our volunteers and community partners, we did so much to take care of the vulnerable. We were able to bring the food truck in at that point from Gibson's to be able to help feed everybody. And it was a really good team effort and a really good community effort. And I'm sure my receiving that was just to really emphasize the great work that everybody did in that year to help out those in need, yes.
How do you deal with the restrictions around church services?
How did we deal with the restrictions around church services? These are some good questions. So, the restrictions around church services, those were very important, of course, and we were very, very, very careful to make sure that we followed all of the rules and the regulations around church services. So when we were unable to hold traditional church services because of the COVID regulations, what we did was we made sandwiches to go out on the food truck to be able to feed those in need. So we had our church congregation that wasn't able to meet together to sing hymns, were allowed to meet together to make food. So we all met together and we made food, and then we headed out on the food truck and we fed everybody. And I tell you, that seems like a perfect Salvation Army solution to a problem, is pulling together our congregation and really showing how much you love God by loving your neighbor and taking care of the person in the most need.
You got a Queen's Diamond Jubilee medal when you lived in Saskatchewan. What did you get it for?
I did. These are some really good questions. So that was a real blessing to receive that medal, and that medal was for a couple of things. One, in the hospitals in southwest Saskatchewan, the clergy, the different priests and pastors, and were often not finding out when their congregation members were in the hospital until it was too late. And many denominations have things such as last rites, where they really need to see the people before they pass away. And a lot of other pastors just have these really important relationships with people when they're in the most serious issues in the hospital. And for whatever reason, that information wasn't getting from the hospitals to the churches. So I was able to speak with the health region and speak with the ministerial society, and I was able to work with a team to be able to set up a hospital chaplaincy program. So what we did was we had a regular person in the hospital, so then the ministerial association would know when any of our congregation members were in the hospital, and we were able to find out if they needed any help and be able to provide the emotional and spiritual care for them in the hospitals in that moment. And then the other thing that was mentioned when I received the medal was the work that we did in the courts, because there's significant challenges, in the courts across this country, and one of the things we set up was a court transition worker. And so we'd have someone who would sit in the courts with victims and offenders, explain what was happening. And we also ran the Alternative Measures program, and we actually set up this program called the Transition Through Incarceration. So we would sit with the person when they were in court. We would go visit them while they were in jail, and we would help them find a place to live, a job, and a social network when they got out. And in the many years that I was there when we were running it, we only had one ever repeat offender. So we absolutely eliminated recidivism, and it was such a blessing to be a part of that program. And so that was a main reason why they awarded me with that medal.
We moved around a lot. Can you tell me a little bit about the places we've lived?
Well, we've lived a lot. We had a lot of different places, especially your sisters, who are much older than you. So your oldest two sisters were both born in Victoria, and so that's where we started serving with the Salvation Army. Then we were posted we moved to Vancouver's downtown east side, where we worked in the downtown east side, and I ran a tutoring program and other things for the Salvation Army in the downtown east side. Then we moved to Winnipeg, where we were able to work in Winnipeg's downtown with Wiedema and Weston Corps. And also one of my so many favorite posts, of course this one's always got to be the most favorite wherever you are at the time, but I also served in Stony Mountain Penitentiary during that time. And so my first sermon that I ever preached after they ordained me and commissioned me was to my friends in Stony Mountain Penitentiary. It's also the first standing ovation that I ever had for a sermon, and it was just a real blessing, because those people really had become my friends. And so as I was moving on, they'll always have a very special part in my heart. And then after Winnipeg, we moved to Nipawin, where we ran a circuit ministry between Nipawin and Tisdale, Saskatchewan. That's where I started getting involved in real justice work. Then we moved to Swift Current, and you were born. And after that, we were transferred to inner city Toronto. And like we were in, when we were in Vancouver, we were in North America's poorest postal code. When we were in Toronto, we worked with 2 congregations, one of which, of course, was in North America's first ghetto. And then after Toronto, we were moved out here to Port Alberni, where we've been really blessed to serve in the Alberni Valley here. And like you already touched on throughout COVID, it was just such a blessing to be able to be part of the solution that this community had to offer.
So why do we move so often anyway?
We move quite a bit because the Army decides, and we like to think that it's through a lot of prayer and reflection, the Army decides where different officers' skills can be most used and at what time. So when there's a position that's available in a different part of the country, they look at all the different officers they have all across Canada and Bermuda, because Bermuda's in our same territory. And so they think, well, who are the best fitted officers for this particular appointment at this particular time? And then they give us a call and they tell us, in a couple months, you're moving from here to here, and we go.
What's your favorite place we've lived?
It's got to be here, right? Absolutely got to be here.
As you mentioned, you've done a lot of work with jails and courts. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, I just explained a little bit about the transition through incarceration. In here, I'm blessed to be part of the Justice Committee that was working to, establish and develop more of alternative measures. At court ministry, it's really quite a blessing to be able to walk with people again before the time they're charged, right through to the time that they're released, and just really be able to see particularly the success stories where people are able to come from a spot of real need to being able to stand on their own 2 feet and live a productive part of society.
You just published a book, Salvation Jesus Guidebook to Romans Road.
I did. I just published this, the Salvation Army just published this book that I wrote, and it's a real blessing. It's a church book, so it's about the church end of stuff that I do rather than the social services end of things. And it talks about Romans Road, which is a big part of evangelism in the church. And so I was really blessed because the person who wrote the foreword to it is the person who's in charge of evangelism for the whole Salvation Army in Canada. And so that was a real ringing endorsement for the Salvation Army to publish a book and allow me to write that for them about that.
You've also written another book, Praise the Lord for Covenants.
I have written another book. You really seem to know your stuff for this interview. You have a lot of detailed questions. So yes, many years ago now, probably 12 or 13 years ago, something like that, Salvation Army published another book of mine called Praise the Lord for Covenants, and that was speaking about the importance of our promises that we make with God, and it really speaks about the fact that God never gives up on us, no matter how many times we mess up, no matter what goes wrong or anything like that. And one of the real blessings about that book was just like Stephen Court, who's in charge of evangelism for the Salvation Army, was able to write the foreword to this book, which was such an honor. General Eva Burrows, she wrote the foreword to my previous book, and she's the only ever 2-term general in the Salvation Army. So she is the only person who ever led the whole worldwide Salvation Army for 2 terms, and she wrote the foreword to that book. So yes, I was blessed to be able to write those 2 books for the Salvation Army.
You also work with the Bread of Life. What do you do there?
I do work with the Bread of Life, and as I touched on a little bit, responsible for the operations there, so work together with a very good team on the board, so many good staff and so many volunteers and community partners to make sure that everybody is fed on a daily basis.
You're also opening a shelter there?
We are also opening a shelter there, and so the shelter will be in the next sort of door over, but part of the same building, and there are so many people who have been sleeping in doorways in this area up here, and we found through the winter we had cold weather protocols that we were following. So we were opening it up in the winter when it was cold out, and we were putting mats on the floors and people were sleeping on the floors. So in partnership with BC Housing and many other people, now we've got permission to put in bunk beds and provide a safe, secure place for people to be so they don't have to sleep on the streets here.
So what do you do when you're not working?
Well, one of the things I do when I'm not working is I go kayaking with my 12-year-old daughter, and and that's a real blessing, spending time with, of course, you, and we're very blessed that your one sister's home from university for the summer. So in those spare moments when we're not working, it's great to hit the water and spend time with family.
What is your favorite place to go kayaking?
What's my favorite place to go kayaking? That's a good question. I think of the places that we go. I like Cameron Lake, but I know that you like kayaking around Manitoba Island, which has now been taken over by pirates. In Sproat Lake, there they have that island out in Sproat Lake that whoever used to own the place had a Manitoba flag, but then the Manitoba flag came down and now it's a pirate flag. So I know that's one of your favorite spots. There's so many good kayaking spots.
How old were you when you first learned to kayak?
I think I was pretty young. I'm not sure, but I'm sure I was in elementary school. I remember when I was pretty little, my dad made a kayak. He actually made a kayak out of I don't know, wood and leather or something like that. So yeah, I've been kayaking pretty much as long as I can remember.
You're going to a concert with my sisters at the end of the month.
I am going to a concert with your sisters at the end of this month. Yes, we are going to a concert, COVID protocols and passports, everything being what they are. Hopefully we're going down to a concert in Seattle. It was a concert I think was supposed to happen in 2020, and so it is finally happening in 2022 here. And hopefully all the artists who were quite old in 2020, who are now 2 years older, will all be healthy enough. We keep following their health on their tour, and your sisters keep telling me when one of them has to go to the hospital or something, so we're hoping that they're all alive and well in a month or so for us to go see the concert.
Who are you seeing?
Well, you should really be interviewing your sister about this. She's up on who's in it, but it's really quite a lineup of mostly bands from the 70s and 80s, right? So we've got Joan Jett, we've got Poison, we've got Def Leppard, we've got Motley Crue, and I think those are the main ones.
Do you have anything else you would like to add?
Just that I think you have done an absolutely wonderful job. You've asked a lot of very good questions, and thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this.
Thank you for coming.
You're very welcome.